Allison,
Hi.
I'm not on camera, I'm behind the camera. These are our two young, excited hosts tonight, Jeremy and Rowan.
Hi,
I'll
you guys.
hop in front in a second to say hello. I'm so happy to see you.
You too.
Thank you so much for doing
I'm
this.
not seeing you, but I'm happy to
Yeah,
see you.
you will in a second. We just watched Gas Food and Lodging. I know for me, like the eighth time, but for these guys, but some of them the first time. So, yeah, I think we have a lot to ask you about. I'm so appreciative of your time.
Cool.
Yeah, hi Allison. Thanks for
Hi.
coming to talk with us. I'm Rowan. I'm a sophomore here at CU Denver, and
Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm also a sophomore.
Hi, you guys.
we're just gonna get started asking you a couple questions. Our first one is just asking about your beginnings in your industry and your time on Paris, Texas. Jeremy and I are both big fans, and we wanted to ask you about how that came about and how you got started making your movies.
Well, that is the most important question you could ask because Paris, Texas, I just recently saw it again. In fact, I almost wore my Paris, Texas t-shirt today. Dang it, I should have done it. Let me, no. What I did, I was in film school at UCLA. Well, no, let me back up. I saw Wim Wenders, I saw an article about him while I was still in a community college, and I was applying to UCLA Film School. So I saw an article, he was working on Hammett at the time. While the movie didn't necessarily look like what I wanted to do, everything he was talking about in the article, it's a now defunct, like American Cinema or something like that. So I can't remember what the magazine was, but it's no longer around. But he was talking about everything he was talking about. I thought, well, that sounds like what I want to do. And he didn't look like the typical director at the time because he had long hair and he wore suspenders, but yet he was very well dressed. Like he was very well groomed and everything, but he had just this very specific look. And so Hammett kind of was a disaster for him. And then he made this film, Lightning Over Water, and I went to see that. I'd gone to see like The American Friend and a couple other films. No, just The American Friend I'd seen at that point. And I thought, oh, that wasn't what I thought it was going to be like based on this stuff that he said in this article. And then I went to see Lightning Over Water, and for some reason it's part documentary and part not, and it's Nicholas Ray dying, basically, and so I went to see that, and for some crazy reason, it just was this switch, and I was like, oh my God, I have to write him a letter. So I wrote him a massive letter. And I sent him a tape of girl group music of the 60s. And this was back in the day where we made mixtapes. You don't, if you have seen Wim Wenders' new movie, Perfect Days, cassettes were a very different deal. I'm very sorry that you guys, grew up in the playlist generation. I use playlists too, but it is not the same. So we made mixtapes. They took a shit ton of time to do, and you really had to think about it. And in fact, when I had the girl group tape ready to send, some of my friends were like, are you sure you want to do that? I mean, you're sending this to a director. And I go, no, you don't understand. He's a cool director. He's a really cool director. Now, this was before the American Indie started and everything. So I sent the letter. I called somehow. I didn't have a phone, by the way. So, well, I guess I did at this point. I guess I did for like a week or two, but my phone was always being shut off. So I think I did have a phone at this point. So I called the Directors Guild. I don't know how I knew to do that, and to find out his agent's phone number. So I called them and asked if I could send him a letter, and they said yes. So it was the Paul Connor agency, which was kind of amazing in itself. So I sent it, and a whole week went by and I didn't hear from him. So I called the agency and I said, I just wanted to make sure that you got this letter that I sent. And they go, oh, well, we probably sent it to his house in New York. And I said, oh, okay. So I was like, New York. So I called up information in New York City, and he was listed in the phone book. So I told my boyfriend at the time, Kurt Voss, I said, oh my God, I have his phone number. What am I going to do? And Kurt was like, oh my God, you're going to have to call him. So I called him. He picks up the phone, and I said, hi, I was so nervous. Is this Vim Vendors? And he was quiet for a minute, and he goes, well, and I said, oh, hi, I'm Allison Anders, and I sent you a letter. And he goes, oh yes, the big one. And then we talked for a little bit. I said, what are you doing? And he says, I'm watching football. And so he says, listen, Allison, I don't write many letters, but if you want to keep writing to me, you can. Which blew my mind. I said, okay, should I send it to your agent? And he says, no, here's my home address. He gave me his home address. And then before we hung up, he said, and thank you for the girl group tape. There were so many on there that I had never heard before. So I'm telling you that because cut to when, I went to see Perfect Days, and he was there, and I walked up behind him and I said, hey, WW. And he goes, hey, which is what we always call each other by our initials. And he said, and he had been talking about the difference between cassettes and mixtapes and the difference between them and playlist. And I said, oh, I seem to remember I made you a few mixtapes in my day, back in the day. And he says, yes, and I still have all of them, which was very dear. So eventually I bugged him enough for a solid year that when I got to UCLA, he sent me a postcard of Strawberry Fields Forever. He knew I loved the Beatles. And he congratulated me on getting into UCLA. And then when I went to UCLA and made my first little film, he gave me feedback on the script. He advised me he says, how are you going to do these dissolves that you've got in the script? And I said, oh, I can do them in the camera. And he goes, oh, that's very risky. But it was Super 8 camera, and I thought, well, it's not that risky, it's just little old Super 8. But so he called me one day. I knew that he was working on that he was writing Paris, Texas with Sam Shepard. So he called me from San Francisco. He says, Allison, I'm coming to Los Angeles in a week. I wonder if you could find time to show me your film.
Yeah.
So I was just stunned. And he came to, and he says, and get together some other films that you want me to see of your friends. So myself and Dean Lent, who shot Gas Food Lodging, and Scott Kirby and Kurt Voss all showed him our first UCLA projects. And after when he was watching my film, he saw the dissolves that Dean shot my Super 8 film, and he says, very risky. And he says, very beautiful, so at the end of it, I told him that I said, listen, I won this award because I was a single mom, and I was broke ass poor, so I signed up for anything. Like if there was any award or any grant or I signed up for all of it. So I saw that there was this President's Undergraduate Fellowship, And so I applied. So when Vim came, I showed him, I said, listen, I won this award, this fellowship, this grant. And he says, oh, congratulations. And I said, yeah, it's to study under you on Paris, Texas. And he just like kind of got this far away look in his eyes, because what I had done was I lied my ass off and told in the grant, I said that he had invited me to study under him on Paris, Texas. So he just gets this far away look and he goes, well, I guess you'll have to come. And I said, well, and Dean and Scott won the same grant. So he brought all three of us to Paris, Texas. But I have to say that for me, I mean, he did kind of stick those guys with walkie-talkies. And they were like working for Claire Denny. The great Claire Denny was our first AD. And but Vim had me move around in different departments so that I would learn everything from, you know, that I could from each department. But the biggest thing that he did was he mentioned this at this Paris, Texas screening, the same week as the Perfect Day screening. He gave me the opportunity to run lines with Harry Dean Stanton.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't even know what that meant at that point. You know, I had no idea what he was talking about. But the incredible thing that happened was at some point, Harry's like, I was running lines with Harry and Dean Stockwell. And Harry Dean is going, God damn it, you know, Vim's not telling me what's going on with this guy. Because those of you who have seen the movie realize that, you know, very early in the movie, we see this man, he's not speaking. Harry Dean Stanton's character isn't speaking. He isn't, you know. And he says, I mean, is he mute? Is he catatonic? And so I just interjected. I said, you know what? I was catatonic once when I was a teenager. They both stop and look at me. And I didn't know what else to say. I was like, oh God, should I have said that or not? And I said, I wrote a poem about it. And Dean Stockwell goes, honey, would you happen to have that poem here? And for some crazy reason, I did. I had it with me. We were in Texas, you know, and for some reason I had that poem. So they sent one of my buddies, Dean or Scott, back to the hotel to get the poem. And then they just grilled me, you know, like, could you hear people talking to you? Could you, you know, when you first spoke, were you, did your voice shake? I said, no, I just talked plain. They said, what did everybody do? I go, they went. And so it's in Paris, Texas, just like that. And so Harry Dean always said, that girl, there was a girl working on the film, because he never wanted to out me. And he would always say there was this girl working on the film and she had been through this. And that became how I did that whole part of the performance, was from what she had to say. So, you know, what was amazing for me was that I never knew that my personal experience like that could inform an actor's performance. So it was invaluable to me. So at the screening a few weeks ago, Paris, Texas, Vim was talking about, you know, he says his second director on the film was Claire Denny. He says, because she was really kind of a second director for him. And he goes, and our third director, and he goes, and she's here. He says, because I never could have made it. Harry would never have remembered his lines without her. So it was really a fascinating experience. But I'll tell you guys what was incredible for me. I mean, it was, you know, what can I say? It was amazing. You know, I mean, the kind of experience he gave me. We didn't get paid, by the way, either. We did not get paid a dime. We got these grants and that was it. So, and I had kids. I had to get a babysitter for that time that I was gone, but I went with one of those kids to the screening, and we were both stunned. We were like, oh my God, this is so much like Gas Food Lodging. And in fact, there's still one little shot in the movie that's Deming, New Mexico, where Gas Food Lodging is set. And Gene spent all of his time watching Robbie Mueller, who shot Vim's movie. And so there are a lot of similarities. The Ry Cooder score is not the same as the J Mascis score, but it's a guitar score. And so there's little things like that constantly that I saw in Paris, Texas. I was like, oh my God, this is like the female version of Paris, Texas or something.
Is there one piece of advice from that experience that you could give to us as filmmakers that has helped you along your journey?
Absolutely. First of all, I will say, if possible, work on only one movie if you want to make movies. Work on a movie of someone you admire deeply. And here's another thing. Mentors should not ever come looking for you. People are always like, oh, would you mentor like a bunch of people? And I'm like, no, I would not. You have to go find your mentor that you want to learn from. And it's up to you to find that person. And it's up to you to convince that person to take you on. It's not up to the mentor to come find you. So that's number one. Second is you don't want to get caught up working on crews. You don't want to do that. You'll never get out of it. I'm telling you. And then you'll be so burnt out. You'll just be like, I don't want anything to do with this business, because it's too much of a grind, So find your mentor, convince your mentor, go work for them. I don't think anybody would work for free again, but if that's possible, do it. Just because I think that when you're getting paid, you're feeling like crew. And I never felt like crew. I felt like we were separate, and they treated us separately too. And some people made fun of us. Oh, here's the film students. They're doing it for the love of film, and they make fun of us. But I was like, well, I'm making movies, bitches. What are you doing? So yeah, I think that's what I would say. And then you've got some, try to work it, try to get into each department, observe as much as you can. I mean, there was one moment where, Vim had sent everybody away from the set. It wasn't because of any nudity or anything like that. It was just, he was just trying to do an intimate scene with Aurora Clement and not an intimate scene, but a conversation with Aurora Clement and Harry Dean Stanton. And he said, he sent everybody away, but I was still peeking around the corner. And he turned around, looked at me and saw me watching. And he goes, you. And I was like, oh shit, he's going to be so mad at me. And he goes, and he looked at me and he goes, you can't learn anything standing back there. So he said, come stand right here next to me. So I just would say take in as much as you can and then go do your own stuff and divorce yourself from your mentor, your hero, and try to make your own stuff. You're in your own voice. And preferably, this is hard, don't become too buddy-buddy with them. I mean, he and I have a friendship and a connection, but I don't have the relationship he has with Bono or somebody like that. You know what I mean? It's a closeness, but it's at a distance. And I think you always need to keep your mentors at a bit of a distance. You need that boundary so that you're still learning, even when you're equals. I mean, later, my mentor asked me, for our first AD. You know, Vim comes to LA to make a movie, and he's like, I need a first AD, I need this cast and that cast, and you know, that was wonderful, you know, but we still keep a certain level of distance. And, you know, he's never produced anything for mine. I'm sure he would, but I never asked him to. You know, I always know that these times are limited with people. I had you know, Martin Scorsese also was one of my exec producers. He was certainly a mentor as well. Not in the same way as Vim, but certainly in another way. And, you know, I knew that that time was only for that movie, it was not gonna, you know, we weren't gonna be buddies. You know, this is like a time for me to learn as much as possible. And he gave me 200%, just like Vim did. So I think that that's the way that you got to look at it, you know, and, yeah, I would say, yeah, everything you can learn. I mean, it was a spectacular experience.
You mentioned it just before. We were very curious about the music in your films, and you like
Oh, yeah.
Jay Mascis, like John Taylor, like Sonic Youth. Like, how do you go about working with these like not very conventional like film music composers?
Well, great question. It was, you know, with Jay, it was hilarious. It's funny. I'm writing. Hey, stop! Boundaries. Boundaries. This is Charlie Watts, everybody. No, stop it. So Jay Mascis, my daughter had suggested him. I had met him, and then she became this big fan and had suggested him at the time that I was making Gas Food Lodging. And I thought, oh, that's a great idea, actually. But I had already worked on Border Radio, which Kurt Voss and Dean Lent and I made at UCLA, a feature before we finished. I mean, one of the things is that I used, even in my student films, I used, you know, needle drops and, you know, songs, ironically, or songs that were very special to me, and used, you know, rock or pop music as score as well. So I was already doing that. And that was, of course, inspired by Vim, because Vim had used Can, the Prague German band, for Alice in the Cities. And, you know, I was inspired by movies like that. So, you know, and musical scores like that. I love traditional scores too. I love that score for Tess, and yeah, I mean, there's fantastic scores, but I also really love the, you know, the Herbie Hancock for Blow Up. And, you know, there's something about that really resonates for me. So with Jay Mass, I had already done with Border Radio, we used Dave Alvin and Steve Berlin, Dave Alvin from the Blasters, Steve Berlin from Los Lobos, to do a guitar score for Border Radio. And we did that score for $500. And it was so good that Oliver Stone ripped it off for Wall Street. And they were just ruthless. They were like, listen, we'll just take them. We're going to use it. You can't do anything about it. We're going to take them. We'll just take Dave and Steve back into the studio and re-record it. And so I was devastated, but, you know, because that was the thing that we had, was our musicians in the movie. So, and then he used it constantly in temp scores after that. In fact, when I was cutting Gas Food Lodging, his fabulous editor, Pietro Scala, who I was at UCLA with, he says, you know, Oliver just loves that Border Radio soundtrack. He says, we use it. I go, yeah, no kidding. And it's like, we use that in every temp score, you know, that we do. So, you know, $500, and we were just doing this with people that we had met, and, you know, in the punk scene. So then Jay Mascis, it was kind of, I wanted to continue to have that kind of score. So Jay Mascis, really got that kind of dusty roads kind of score for me that was hilariously, I don't know if you know much about what Jay Mascis is like, but not one for talking too much, so my producers were beside themselves. They were, in fact, my producer, Dan Hassett, looked at me at one point and he goes, because Jay was so uncommunicative, and he said, is this one of those faith things where I'm just going to have faith this is all going to work out all right? And I go, yeah, it really is. So he did that beautiful score for Gas Food Lodging. And then I just continued on with that. I mean, with Things Behind the Sun, I knew that I wanted a sonic youth score, and they recorded that at their studio, and they that was a very cheap score too, although not as cheap as Border Radio. I haven't quite gotten back to that again, but yeah, so I just really enjoy that kind of score, and most people don't do it anymore. And that was one thing when Vim was talking about Paris, Texas, and Ry Cooder's score. He said that he was met with resistance, in America for that kind of score, and which is kind of crazy to think because it's legendary now. But my daughter, who's just this fabulous music supervisor, she turned to me and she goes, they're always like that about guitar scores, always in the industry still, which is kind of crazy,
Kind of piggybacking off of that, music is such a huge reoccurring theme in your work. What makes you keep coming back to music, and what is the responsibility of us as filmmakers to draw influence from other artistic mediums outside of film?
Oh, great. Yeah, responsibility. Well, I feel like, I mean, partly I'm music obsessed. I mean, I kind of, as a child, there was, I'm from Kentucky. There was music always around. I was born, when Elvis put out his first record, and my parents were teenagers and they loved rock and roll. And, and then when I was 7 years old, I started buying records. And I also started going to movies by myself, to double features. I mean, I would walk to the movie theater and sit there and watch movies, and or sometimes I go with cousins or whatever, but it wasn't unusual to go to the movies by yourself. So the other thing about music, I just can't even imagine not having music with films. It's too delicious. It's too great of a combination. And boy, did that ever come to a head for me at 10 years old, to see A Hard Day's Night in the movie theater and just kind of lose my mind, because I was like, this is like my favorite band in the world, and it's music and it's movies, and I'm in the movie theater. I don't think that even seeing them live would have been as intoxicating to me as seeing them, in this movie theater. It was just spectacular for me. And I also, in some of I always cast musicians in movies, always. I've done that from the very beginning. And in Border Radio, we cast punk musicians because we didn't have access to even professional actors, so we cast local punk musicians, John Doe and Christie and others. And I love just doing the music performances. Was really fun to do, really hard, but really fun. And so from that day forward, it was something that I just always wanted to do. So in Gas Food Lodging, of course, Jay Mascis shows up, and then later, you know, I mean, I did that forever. I mean, I just have always had musicians, even in Mi Vida Loca, I have musicians as actors in the film. There's a couple of different places. So it's always interesting to me. I feel like music gives a context. It gives it helps not create the emotion. That's when you're really doing it wrong. Is when you're using music to create the emotion. But it can just zing it up. You know, it can just enhance it. And by the way, while we're on this subject, so that I don't forget, I just had this conversation with Guillermo del Toro, where, you know, one of the biggest things my daughter fights against, and I've seen this on directing TV, is that editors now put all kinds of temp score in and temp music in the cuts. So you can imagine, for her as a music supervisor, she's always trying to go, do not put in the Rolling Stones. Do not put in Michael Jackson. Do not put in please do not put in Taylor Swift. We can't afford these songs, you know? So, but nobody listens to her, and editors inevitably put this stuff in. Now, I will tell you that I worked with Thelma Schoonmaker on Grace of My Heart, one of the greatest editors ever to live. She does not do that. There is no way she puts music in. You wait until you've got the cut, and you wait until you need to be cutting to your actors' performances. So you need to give your actors the decency to watch their performance, pick their best stuff, cut it as beautifully as you can, and then you know, add the zinger, right? You add the music. But you need to cut it dry. And that's what Guillermo does. That's what I always do. And then you can add the stuff later, but you've got to get that cut without doing that. And never cut to a song. Never cut to a song. You were cutting to the wrong thing if you're cutting to a song. Because even if you think about the silent era, right? They were cutting, sure, there was music on set to give the actors, you know, atmosphere. But they were not going to cut to that music. They were cutting actors' performance. And that's where you need to be, is with the actors, with your characters, you know. So don't cut to music, because 9 times out of 10, you are not going to be able to afford that song. You know, or any number of things can happen, like somebody's in jail and then somebody else, there's some dispute, or like James Brown's kids are fighting over who owns it. You know, I mean, you just can't. Now, funny enough for her recently, I'll just give you this little aside, was that on Reservation Dogs, she's the music supervisor. And she says, the one time that I said, please use the Rolling Stones, and she actually got the first placement of their first, you know, their first track, and, you know, in their first album in a million years. And they did it very cheaply. They wanted their song in that film, in that show, and they gave it to them dirt cheap, cheaper than anybody else, you know, any other tracks, because they just really loved the show, and they were like, hey, we're, you know, this is our first album in all these years. And so so that's and I also feel like musicians are just interesting subjects, because I think that while they might always have sort of the trajectory of, like, we start out, we get an audience, we become famous, then we're struggling to hang on to the fame, and then all this other stuff happens, all these dramas. But in that, and then there's sort of the boring part, which is survival or not, you know, but within that, there's nuances to work with as a filmmaker. So for me, that's always interesting. You know, I'm surprised I haven't had more lead characters who are musicians, frankly, because I always find it interesting.
Yeah, awesome.
Hey, 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 hey.
Hey, I've really missed you. How have you been? You okay?
I'm pretty good. I've got a knee injury right now. I don't know what I did. Don't know what I did. It hurts,
It's just, yeah.
but I'm all right.
So is that an original Wanda poster, a French Grand sized Wanda poster that you have back there? So that's the other thing I noticed about guest food lodging is, you know, we talked about Paris, Texas, his influences. Can you talk a little bit about Barbara Loden's influences on you, and also just the idea of being a woman filmmaker in Hollywood now?
Well, I'll tell you, yes. I mean, yes, that poster. Can you believe it? $100 on eBay.
No, I'm
$100.
so jealous.
I couldn't believe it.
Beautiful. Yeah,
So great.
It's the first French size too. It's like 40.
Yeah, it's a French, exactly. It's the French poster. Well, I will say that she has since had an effect on me. I have yet to make a movie since I discovered Wanda, so she hasn't had any impact on my work, sadly. But I guarantee you, if I were to make another movie, that influence would be there, because it's just an astonishing movie, and it does feel very, it feels a bit like Gas Food Lodging in some ways, in that there is this small town and there is the road, and there's, I don't know, there's something about it. I mean, Gas Food Lodging is an inverted road movie, is what I always felt like. It was like off, you know, it's like you're on a road trip and then you get off at the exit, you know, and go see what those
I've
people
actually
are
seen
doing.
in Wanda, Allison, where she stops outside of a movie theater playing a Mexican film. So I wondered if that was like where you got that from. It's not. That's nuts.
Not. No, I never saw Wanda until a few years ago.
That's nuts. Okay.
It was on my it was on my Sight and Sound
Oh, wow.
10 greatest films of all time, but
As it should
so
be.
the only one that I got in. No one else in my top 10 made it into the top 100, but Wanda did.
So tell us about your experience. You've made like 8 independent films, you know, that you've directed and written, and you know that's a huge amount for unfortunately for a woman filmmaker. What's it been? I mean, you really rode the crest of independent cinema in 1992, and a lot of those guys that you wrote it with went on to like a lot of stuff. What's the climate like now? Has it gotten better? Is it still treacherous for young women starting out?
Well, I think it's better now. I do think it's a lot better for women now. Certainly better for women now. I mean, what would happen back in the day was, in my day, now this was partly luck, and then later it was something that I learned to do. So when I made Gas Food Lodging, well, when I made Border Radio, it came out in the theater for like 5 days or something. We got totally screwed over by the distributor, and then I was back to square one again. So I was like, well, I can't let that happen again, you know? So I just kept trying. I just kept writing, trying to make things, and won a couple of screenwriting awards that helped me along the way. But, and that's another thing, is please keep writing in between movies, and try to get any kind of award you can. Like, you know, if there's like the Nickel Fellowship, or, you know, I got the Sam Gold one. I mean, I would just sign, like I said, I would sign up for anything. But what happened was with Gas Food Lodging, so when I went to Sundance with Gas Food Lodging in 92, before I went, I was at the Sundance lab. Another good thing to do is to go to these labs. I went to the Sundance lab with Mi Vida Loca. So I was already had the next film in place. What I started to notice with my other, I mean, I'm sure there were male counterparts that didn't have that either, you know, that weren't ready with the next film. But the difference is that most of the male filmmakers that I went to Sundance with that became very successful had films that had a kind of genre built in. Most of the women that were making films when I was did not work in that. They worked in very personal stories, and they were character-driven stories. Well, guess what? The independent world did not know anything about the female audience. They knew nothing about how to get our films seen by anybody. You know, and so, I mean, luckily I had a kind of art house thing going on, that I was part of a group of filmmakers, the American indie film movement. But there were a lot of women within that group too, who just never, people just didn't see their movies. Because, you know, my feeling was you could go to these film festivals and you could you win the prize, top prize. You could, you know, have all these great reviews, distributor picks up your film, and then nothing happens with it because they don't know how to find your audience for your movie. And then nobody's really interested in you. You know, they're giving you a bunch of meetings beforehand of crazy projects they've got at studios or whatever. Back in the day, it was just silly stuff. But the guys, you know, if they had a bit of a genre element, they were getting opportunities that you weren't going to get, because your film would do really well because they knew how to market your film. So I think that now it's very different in that regard. You know, I think that women's films, films directed by women, don't really fall into the same kind of, you know, as many men make character-driven stuff as women do now in the independent world. And so I think that I just think it's a lot better now. I just don't think you have to rely on it that much. And I think that they've actually, for better or worse, they've gotten better at targeting your audience with algorithms and so forth, you know, and that is a mixed bag, but they have gotten better at that.
I hand it back over to you guys.
We're gonna open it up to the audience to ask some questions.
Sure.
Emily, if you want to ask.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Hi. Hey.
I was just wondering, we just watched Gas Food Lodging and it was really cool. And I saw that it was an adaptation of a book, and I'm mostly a writer, and I would love to hear about how you, like, your process and your experience with adapting a book written by somebody else into a movie, and like what your biggest concern was with preserving the story.
Well, I'm going to tell you the truth, because why wouldn't I?
That'd be great.
I kept practically nothing to that book. I mean, when I got the book, when these guys gave me the book, they were like, here's the book, and here's the first draft of the script that somebody else had written. So I read them both, and I was like, I can't believe I didn't write this, because it was a single mom with these kids, these daughters. Now, she had 3 daughters in the book. I immediately got rid of one of them, because I was like, 3 daughters, that's too much. This woman's got too much on her plate. I gave her a sex life. It was set in Chicago in the 60s. I moved it to New Mexico. There really wasn't that, like the one daughter gets pregnant, the oldest daughter, but she was like very popular, but she was also very promiscuous. Like, she had no boundaries, you know, no sexual boundaries, and like got into trouble, sexual trouble, you know, like, and I was like, well, that's kind of odd. Like, you know, I don't think that it would actually, you would be like the popular girl, but yet you'd be, you know, have this complete crazy, self-destructive darkness, So, so I put the sexual trauma into the script that was not in the book or the original script. I put the Mexican movies in there because I didn't believe I don't think there were movies in the book. I think, but there were like old 50s suburban movies in the script, but it was present day, and I thought that's not going to be in a small town. So I got rid of that and made the Mexican movies. Once we were in New Mexico, it really made sense. And so, and there was no voiceover, and it wasn't truly from anyone's point of view, but I made it from the youngest sister's point of view. And I gave the mom, like, just a little more. The mom had nothing in the book. She was just miserable. And I thought, well, let's give her some goofy guy, and some fun, because she had a hard life, and I was like, I want to, let's give her a sexual identity and, a sex life. And so I gave her a couple of goofy guys. But yeah, so I didn't stay true to it at all. And I always felt bad about it until I learned how much money he made from us buying the rights to the book. So I was like, he's good, man. It's all right. But I've since adapted a couple of other things that didn't get made, but it's tough. I got to tell you, it's tough because, even directing somebody else's script is, I always feel a little trepidatious about it. It's always like, I want to make sure I honor it, but at some point as a director, you have to make it your own, even if it's your own script, by the way. Sometimes you just got to go, this writer, I don't know what they were thinking, and then you realize it was you, But yeah, so that's it. I would say, it's always interesting, isn't it, when you see something adapted from a book and you're like, I wonder how faithful it is to the book, and I think it's tricky because you kind of gotta, and I know that a lot of writers, a lot of novelists realize they have to surrender that when it comes to making cinema of their book. I think it's pretty tough. I became a filmmaker because instead of just a screenwriter, because I realized, oh, wait a minute, I don't want some maniacal director like fucking with my script, so I thought I'll become a director too. So that's kind of what, yeah, I think it's a hard balance. It's really hard. And sometimes you just realize that you can't, oh, my son was just talking to me about No Country for Old Men. And he was talking about how Cormac McCarthy, how the whole scene of Jake Brolin coming upon the shootout scene, coming upon all these guys with, he says that goes on for like 10 pages or something. And he says, and in the movie, it's just that you can show, and I think, did Cormac McCarthy write the script? I can't remember, but with, but in cinema, you can show so much more that you don't have to say. And of course, as writers, I've started to write a novel as well. And you have to kind of explain so much that you don't have to explain, you're doing that visually. So just keep that in mind too. And I think that most novelists realize, that that's going to be the case.
Do you have any advice for like students who are adapting short stories or novels into like shorter versions, or just like any advice for adaptations, I guess?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say just that, that if you, of course, the easiest thing is to look for the dialogue in the pieces, right? I mean, what I try to do is take the dialogue and put it on a page. Then fill in the scene as much as I can from what's on the page, as much material as I've been given. And I tend to overwrite my scripts because I see them so visually, and I see all the stuff in the setting, the set dressing and everything that I want to put in there. And actually, I tell my students to do that too. I'm like, just, I know everybody tells you not to do that, but I do that because just write it like you're going to make it, and write it like you're going to shoot it. Like they go, don't put shots in. I'm like, bullshit, put shots in. Oh, don't put parentheticals. Actors don't like that. Well, so they'll do it a different way. I mean, I've never once had an actor throw down the script and say, you said quietly. I'm not going to do that. I'm offended by this. No, that doesn't happen. So don't listen to that. Just write what you need to write, so that you have your notes for yourself of what you want, and for everybody else. Oh, the other thing is to remember that your screenplay is a working document. It is not literature. Unlike what you're adapting from, it's a working document. It's for you as the director, it's for your DP, it's for your prop master, it's for your actors. They're all going to look at it, and they're going to take it quite seriously and quite literally. So, give them as much information as you want. You're the vision, so definitely put all of that in there. But just remember, it is a working document. And so therefore you want to give everybody their marching orders. Don't be vague, If being vague is for the but even then it's not. I was going to say that's for the financiers, but even at that it's not, because they can't. You got to tell them what they're going to be, because they're really not going to visualize it. And people will jump off from you say a red dress, and your costume designer thinks it would be better a palette of blues, and then you have that discussion. But put in what you envision. And that's even true for adapting. So you take what you want, put as much in, and then make it yours. You have to make it yours at some point.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, Allison, I'm Nick.
Hey.
I just wanted to say, we just watched Lodging. It was really inspiring. It just made me want to go make movies, and this talk you've been giving is amazing. So thank you so much for coming and doing it.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
My question is, a lot of us are kind of by situation forced to work with non-actors. And what is your experience working with non-actors, and what advice would you give in directing them?
Great. Listen, I love working with non-actors. I absolutely love it. And I'm going to tell you that I love actors, period. But I will tell you that you think that working with non-actors is a huge leap from working with professional actors. It's really not that big of a stretch. It really isn't. So one thing that I was appalled by when I was in film school was I would see this work that my fellow students were doing, and it was everything. I called it that horrible film school world of like just this kind of unnatural acting, and they were unnatural in their environments. So I set out to really make things as natural as possible. So part of that was just having real environments. Remember that we're all in the space that we occupy. You want on screen for people to be occupying a space that you believe they live there. You want them to be believable, basically. And I think that that comes from you working with the actors in that space, the non-actors, putting them in the situation, giving them as much information as they ask for, not too much information, and just trying to keep it as natural as possible, conversational, just as natural as you can get it. And even if it calls for really extreme performance, you'll be able to get that. I would start out with the more conversational, easier sort of scenes in the beginning with your actors, and until they've got their confidence, because that's the only thing. That's what non-actors lack, really, are there's certain little tools, but that's not so hard to, and you master them over time, right?
Yeah.
But I would say that the hardest thing is to make sure that they have the confidence. Also, I would adjust the script. I always do this anyways, adjust the script according to what the actors are doing. So, you sort of, not that you don't stick to your script and to your intention, but if it's not working, try something else. Try throwing that out and then come back to it later when they've got that confidence again. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Here's the thing. I did this podcast. It isn't out yet. Well, it is out, 4 episodes, called One Handshake Away. It's Peter Bogdanovich's podcast on classic his conversations with classic film directors. So I got invited to, so there's like Quentin Tarantino and Rian Johnson and Guillermo and all these people doing, Greta Gerwig, doing conversations either with Peter Bogdanovich. In my case, he was already dead, and so I did mine with Guillermo. But I chose Raoul Walsh. And Raoul Walsh, it's kind of amazing because he worked with non-actors in almost everything that he did. I mean, he worked with James Cagney, and he worked with Errol Flynn, and he worked with Robert Mitchum, and he made a star of John Wayne. But everywhere he had non-actors kind of bolstering the reality. And that's the beauty of non-actors, is they're going to give you something unexpected. And that's for better or worse.
Yeah.
But but the better is worth the worst, so so I think that there's a history of that is rather beautiful. And you can get beautiful stuff from non-actors.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Something I'm really curious about is you're both known for both solo directorial work and co-directing creatively. Like, what's the difference between those two for you?
Well, one is a singular vision and one's a shared vision. So, on Border Radio, we didn't really, we had already made our separate movies, and they tended to have a certain similar vibe. And so there was a guy that was working in the tech office, Billy Woodbury, who had made this beautiful film, Bless Their Little Hearts, part of the LA Rebellion cinema. And he said, listen, you guys need to make a feature. Because when we screened our second films, they all had such a similar vibe. They were all black and white, and everybody was like, oh my God, this is like a new movement within the film school, And so he said, I'll help you. I'll make sure you get the equipment, but you need to make a feature. So that's how we started to make Border Radio. So the 3 of us co-directed. Dean shot it, Kurt and I wrote it, and we all 3 co-directed. Then later I co-directed 2 more times with Kurt Voss. And we've been a couple too for years, and then for years we were not, and then but we knew each other real well, and while we didn't have the same kind of vision in our stuff, we always sort of, we knew what we were looking for, and it was interesting after years of, like when we made Sugartown together, it was interesting to co-direct again because we had totally different skill sets. He worked with actors totally different than I did. And he was just like, they got to hit their marks. They got to hit their marks. And I was like, I just remember one conversation. I was like, oh yeah, actors really love it when you tell them to hit their marks. And he goes, well, Allison, I don't care what bullshit you make up to tell them, but if they don't hit their marks, they're not going to be in the shot. So I was like, all right. So I went back and I talked to the actors gingerly, and I was like, so when you come up, if you could come up this way. And then Rosanna, our cat, is going, oh my God, did I not hit my mark? And I was like, all right. So I was worried over nothing, so we just had an interesting way of working together, and so I don't know if I probably would co-direct again if there was somebody that I was close enough to envision. I mean, actually, there is one filmmaker who is also from my same hometown. She's a beautiful filmmaker, Martha Stevens. And recently she was saying, oh, we should make a film together. We're actually cousins. We found out after we knew each other. But we, I could probably make something with her. Probably. If it were like a documentary, probably. But I don't know if we'd probably like just go nuts with each other if we tried to make a narrative film together. So it's tough, working with a team, but it can sure be done. I mean, lots of people do it so successfully, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed having a buddy it was kind of like being in a band, instead of just being the sole director.
I have one last simple question to round us out. Do you have a favorite movie theater in the country, and what's your favorite memory at that movie theater?
Oh God, yes. It's not a movie theater anymore, but it is a theater still. And it was my hometown theater, that theater where I went and saw Hard Day's Night. It's the Paramount Movie Palace, and it's in my hometown of Ashland, Kentucky, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's got velvet seats, and it's got spectacular, powder rooms for the ladies, and I don't know what's in the men's room, but it's just a beautiful, beautiful theater. There's these beautiful frescoes that they were buried under soot when I was a child, and I still found it the most beautiful place on earth. And they since restored that, and it's a live music, live theater venue now. It's funny that you asked, because I just got their flyer today of their events. I follow them, and I just got I'm on their email list of things that were happening, and they've got like some hip hop acts, some stuff coming, and some country music acts. And I thought, oh, I just wish it were a movie theater again. It would be fun if they had put the screen back up and have movies again, but it's all right. It's beautiful. I'm so glad it's still there. Just so glad that it still exists.
So Allison, that's all the time that we have for you with us. Thank you so much for doing this. Just so grateful to have you in my life. Let's catch up soon.
You too.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
luck
Bye.
with everything.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Awesome.
You. Hey, let's take one quick picture. Did I do it? I don't know if I did it.
Yeah.
Oh. What is it? It's Command 3, right?
I have no
there,
idea.
there it went.
You get it?
Let me get one more. Yay! Walter, you weren't in it.
I wasn't in it. Okay, tuning at home.
Come in.
Emily, get in.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. Oh, dang it. There we go.
All right.
Bye, you guys.
Thanks, Allison.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
All right, I love you. Bye.
Bye, hon.